Welcome to the Education Investment Podcast. In a world where investors are looking for stable and growing long-term returns with social impact, the education sector is becoming increasingly attractive. We speak to leading educators, operators, and investors in the education sector around the world to explore this growing investment theme alongside our listeners. From preschools to K-12 schools to higher education and vocational education. From EdTech to education infrastructure. From VC investors to private equity and family offices, we explore it all. I'm your host, Monde Nkosi. Education has always been a big part of my life because my mother founded a school which was across the road from our home. I have benefited from excellent schools and teachers in South Africa and the US. I went on to study education and am now very grateful to be an investor in this sector that I love.
All opinions expressed by podcast guests are solely their own opinions. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions.
Today, I am privileged to host Stacey Brewer for a conversation on affordable independent schools. We'll discuss her experience building a network of independent schools in South Africa. We'll break down what affordable independent schools do differently to enable them to offer lower fees while still delivering excellent academic outcomes. We'll also explore the value proposition of schools to investors, and we'll discuss social impact. Stacey is the co-founder and CEO of Spark Schools, a network of independent schools in South Africa, serving more than 16,000 students across 26 schools. Stacey is also a celebrated leader who has won a range of awards, including South African Innovator of the Year and the Elle Boss Award for leading female entrepreneurs in South Africa. Stacey and I met through the Archbishop Tutu Fellowship, which we are both fellows of. And since our paths crossed, she's been very helpful in my education investment journey and has also been good fun to get to know. Stacey, it's wonderful to have you here. Welcome to the pod.
Yeah, and thank you for hosting and inviting me.
Thanks, Stacey. So first off, before we get to affordable independent schools, let's start off with you.
Sure.
So we'd love to learn a bit more about your journey. Tell us a bit about where you grew up, your family, and ultimately your path into education.
Yeah, sure. So born and bred, Joburg, first generation. My parents are originally from Zimbabwe, and I went to Rhodes University. I did a BSc and then spent some time overseas just traveling and living life and making as many fun experiences as possible. And then I came back and I worked with FIFA during the World Cup. And during that time, I realized, and a bit of travel from overseas, I realized actually I want to do my master's to go overseas and get a decent job. And so I went and did my MBA at Gibbs in Johannesburg, South Africa, and I did in entrepreneurship, so it was a full-time MBA. And it was during that whole process when it was highlighted to me how bad the education state is in South Africa. I've been fortunate enough to go to great schooling, so we're attending great schooling here in South Africa, and so I didn't realize how shocking it was. I mean, we spend so much money as a country in terms of the budget and GDP allocation, and yet we rank bottom of the world if you look at various competitiveness reports. And so I just thought this is completely unacceptable, and I just started doing more and more research. I did my thesis on a sustainable financial model for low-fee private schools, and then the journey did not stop, and spent some time looking at models globally, and then eventually, beginning of 2012, I was like, I'm fully committed to what we want to do and what we can develop in South Africa, and we can go in more detail. And that's how the journey started. And now, we launched our first school 2013. We're over 10 years old, now looking at beyond just a South Africa play. So I'm very, very excited about what's next, but I'm also very proud what the team has achieved over the last 10 plus years.
That's brilliant. There's a lot there that
you went through
very, very quickly. So I'd love, before we get to Spark, just to stay still on you for a little. So one of the themes that came through as you were talking was travel quite a lot. So I'd love to learn where were some of the places that you traveled and worked.
Yeah, so I worked in a chateau in Bordeaux, France. For a bit, I worked in a villa in the south of France, all for very high net worth individuals. I worked on the motor yacht, so for famous people. So actually, one of the guys I worked for was Eric Clapton. So spent some time, Thailand, Maldives, Suez Canal, Mediterranean, obviously, and then the Caribbean. So it's a great way actually to arrive in a country, not on an airplane or a car, but, from the seaside into a town or a big city. It was an amazing experience.
That is wonderful. Did you pick up any wine habits there? Bordeaux?
Yes, Bordeaux, definitely. I made a lot of friends with, that were winemakers and got great opportunities to try, some of the best wine that you couldn't normally not access. I went there to learn French and learn about wine.
Wonderful, wonderful. And tell me a bit about FIFA as well. Do you love sport, or what attracted you to work with FIFA?
No, I was very, very sporty at school, but I got an opportunity through a connection to say would I like to head up their FIFA headquarters. I had a lot of experience in hospitality, working for high net worth individuals that are extremely particular how they like things done. And I worked directly with the FIFA executives and all their entourage and visitors and heads of state. And so I just loved it. I mean, we got tickets to whatever games we wanted to go. I mean, it was the best time in the country, I think. Just the energy, the vibe was amazing. And for me, it was just the experience of working with these high-profile, again, individuals, but I was exposed to a lot and also got to meet so many different people. So I headed up their headquarters here, just in terms of like hosting also media, everything to do with hospitality.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
And then that all brings you then to, you mentioned your master's or your MBA, and what starts off as a thesis in the education sector expands into a lot more. So maybe tell us a bit more about that thesis. Were there some early mentors or the internships or the like?
So Margie Sutherland was my supervisor at the time, and I wanted to do a quantitative study because I'm a numbers person. I'm not I'm a numbers person. And she told me, put on your big girl panties and go and do a qualitative study on the Slofi private school space, because it's also a way for you to meet and start networking and building up your network if this is something you do want to pursue. And I'm extremely grateful that she did force me basically to do a qualitative study on this space. And so I've spent a lot of time meeting with schools, with experts, just trying to understand how are these low-fee private schools actually operating? Are they innovative? What are they doing? How are they cost effective? Is it a school that you'd want to send your own kids to? What's the quality like? And from there, my journey just continued to then also spending some time looking at low-fee private schools in India, and then researching some other models across the continent. So Margie as a supervisor was the biggest mentor at the beginning. And in fact, during this research paper, I met Dave Gibb, who was a true angel investor. He gave completely idea money, took zero equity. That will be my paid forward going forward, is that I will also back an entrepreneur in time when I'm ready. And from there, we used to meet every single week. We now meet once a month at our usual John Fornos, and he was a hugely valuable person that walked the journey with, in particular at the beginning, but he really, as I say, gave us idea money, didn't take any equity, and he's like, go figure it out.
And at what stage did you decide that this is progressing now from a thesis, which it started as, into this may be my life's work? I'm going to start a company around this.
So it was January, February 2012, I would say. So we got introduced to Rocket Ship Education in the US, who were pioneering blended learning at the time. And this was actually a connection through Dave Gibb, who met Reed Hastings, who's a founder of Netflix, blah, blah. Anyway, it was like amazing connections. And we went, and Ryan, a mate from Varsity Days, we went and spent some time looking at Rocket Ship Education in the US, and was like highly inspired in terms of what they're doing. And we realized this is something we could do here. So came back to South Africa sort of Jan, Feb, and two of their teachers were persistent to come and help us set this up. And I was absolutely terrified because we don't even have a name, we don't have money, we don't have anything. And Dave Gibb, my mentor and a very good friend now, said to me, don't worry, he'll cover also their salaries for 6 months. But, so from then, and then Ryan said, no, he also wants to commit to it full time. So it was like, well, let's just go with it. We've got nothing to lose. Ignorance is bliss. Let's go try figure it out. And then we just started speaking to so many people looking for capital, because obviously schools are expensive to run. And then eventually we came across a whole lot of other high net worth individuals, angel investors, who then committed to it. And we're like, okay, now we have to make this happen. And from there, very quickly, we then launched our school within a year.
That's lovely,
or
Stacey.
less, even,
There's two themes I love in there. One is serendipity. It sounds like Dave Gibb had met Reed Hastings, and you had become close to him, and he was involved in rocket ship education. And from that sort of initial introduction set sparks so much that comes next, and you eventually starting a school group, etc. So I'm a big believer in putting what you desire out there to other people in the world and your network, etc. And it's wonderful to see that things like this can spark from there. And the other is taking a leap of faith, which it's extraordinary what you've built in 11 years since taking that leap of faith back in 2012. So I think let's move on then to some of the main topics for discussion today, which is affordable independent schools. When I mentioned the phrase independent school or private school, whichever version of that, I think what immediately comes to a lot of people's minds is very expensive schools. Here in South Africa, maybe it's a St Andrews or Michaelhouse, or in Kenya, St Mary's, or in the UK, Eton O'Hara, or in the US, Harvard Westlake. Every country has some version of these schools. So just give me a picture. How diverse is the independent school sector, and where does Spark fit in?
Yes, I would say traditionally independent schools are seen to be elitist, for sure. They seem to very much serve the upper class in society, and seem to be very, very, very expensive. But that's completely changing. Where this whole low-fee private school movement happened was actually just parents saying, I'm sick and tired of not getting the best education for my child. I would rather pay or contribute a bit of, or pay something in order to hold the schools accountable, to rather have or at least hopefully stronger quality education in terms of access. And so you do, within the South African market, there's a massive range of school fees that are independent. So you could have a non-profit that a lot of its donor funding could be, say, 1,000 or 2,000 rand a year, and then you've got your high-end Hilton, what are they, 300,000-400,000 a year. So the market is huge. Just the lower end in terms of price point are often the mom and pop shops. So just, it could be a father, could be someone within the community realizing that there's an opportunity here and there's a market that parents actually want to send their kids to private schools, willing to pay something, and then send their kids to the school. But as I mentioned, sometimes they're quite questionable in terms of quality. If we look at Spark, so when we talk about affordable private schooling, we look at what's affordable to the country. So we take what government has spent per child to educate, and we benchmark our total cost to educate on that. And so when we talk about affordable private schooling, that's what we mean. But in fact, we very much serve middle income families. So profiles could be an Uber driver, could be a small business owner, it could be administrator, it could be a secretary. And we fall so at the moment we're 35,000 Rand for primary school and 45 for high school. We have one fee for primary and one for high school currently. And very much serving the household income of about 20,000 Rand plus. And depending on where our schools are, we are attracting all walks of life.
That's fascinating. There's a lot there. So if I take that price point that you said you're at then, which is about fees 35,000 Rand per annum, entry level fees. So in dollars, this would be, call it $3,000 per annum or somewhere in that sort of range. And that being broadly comparable with what the state is paying if you look at their budget divided by the number of students that they serve. So how does that 35,000 Rand broadly compare to where the state is?
So that's at the school fees, but if you look at the total cost, so it varies per province as well. But in fact, if you remove the property side of things, because we pay rent, they don't necessarily always have property costs, we are actually cheaper to operate than what government is spending when we've looked at the national benchmarking. And last year, one of the big organizations, non-profits, and I think the World Bank got involved to look at, what is the actual price that currently South Africa is spending per child in the various provinces. And we are much cheaper than in terms of, if you remove all the head office costs as well as the property costs, we're cheaper to run a school than what the government is currently doing.
That's very interesting, very interesting. And I'm keen to come back to that and double click on what you're doing differently to enable those kind of price points. But maybe before we get there, just one question on your motivation when you were starting Spark. We spoke a little bit about the founding story, and we've come to where in the market overall that you've positioned yourselves, which is really offering affordable quality education. How would you describe your motivation?
So the reason why I started Spark was to address the national crisis that we see in education. I was completely shocked. I think it's completely unacceptable. But I also don't think it's necessarily this is just government's problem. We all love to point fingers at government and say it's your issue and you need to solve it. But in fact, it's all our issues as citizens of this country. And so from there, it was just this high sense of responsibility. We've got to make that change. And in fact, Spark, the name, comes from the William Yeats quote, education is not the filling of the pail, but the lighting of the fire. And we wanted to create that spark in South Africa that will hopefully also lead others to, want to solve big problems, think about it differently, innovate in certain ways, and don't necessarily see constraints as a difficult or an obstacle in solving big problems.
I love that. Getting up and doing something about it, not throwing rocks from the outside.
Yeah, exactly.
And I 100% agree with you. It's very easy to criticize. It's very hard to do something about it. So it's wonderful to see that you have. Let's move forward then to double click on that point that I mentioned earlier. At 35,000 Rand a year, it's almost a lower cost than what our state is spending, which is extraordinary. So what are you doing differently, or affordable independent schools in general? What are some of the things that are done differently?
Yeah, so it's twofold. So for us, it's around this high, I know everyone says this, but about the high quality education at a very affordable cost. So how do you bring that intersection into play? Because generally people think high quality education is expensive. Yes. And if something's cheaper, it's poor quality. But we wanted to completely change that thinking and mindset. And the way we do it is through technology that's been integrated into our learning process that drives two things. It drives cost efficiencies for us to operate at our price point, and it creates a very data-rich environment so we can differentiate our instruction. And so we gather data from all modalities of learning to truly understand where kids are at and then intervene and extend based on their needs per subject, per grade level. From a cost-effective perspective, so if you look at the greatest cost of all schools, it's your infrastructure and it's your salaries. So what Spark has done is through our scheduling is we utilize teachers' time and space very cost effectively. So an example would be, more than likely when we were all at school, there was one bell, everyone would break at the same time, everyone would rotate classes at the same time, when in fact Spark, each from grade R to 3, the foundation phase, or K to 3, each class is on its own rotation. So one class might start in maths, and we have specialist teachers. One might start in the learning lab, which is, you could say, your computer room, and then there's just a rotation. As the kids get older, from grade 4 onwards, they are on their own rotation, depending on their needs, again, moving through different modalities of learning, from direct instruction, online space, independent practice, peer collaboration, and it's just the effectiveness, it's teacher time and space that makes us very cost effective. So we don't need a huge property. We also don't have massive facilities and swimming pools and athletics tracks. For us, it's like, how do we ensure that the fundamentals are extremely strong, that these kids, we call them our scholars, are set up for success, but of course not taking away that sport isn't important and all the other cultural elements, but we can add that on in various other ways. But for us, it was like kids are far behind in terms of where they should be in terms of grade level, and what can we do about it to make sure we close those gaps and close them as quickly as possible.
Oh, that's really impressive. So both technology as well as the infrastructure and the staff, using all of those efficiently to deliver high quality education, but at a materially reduced cost. Maybe let's double click into some of those. Let's start off with the technology side. So maybe give me an example of how you're integrating technology to lower the cost.
So for us, tech is not just around the cost, but it's also the data that we get from the tech as one of the ways of learning that can help inform instruction and really support teachers in making sure that their direct instruction or small group instruction is really valuable and value add. So when we look at tech, so we've got 4 different learning models that are age appropriate. And so if we look at the foundation phase, K to 3 or R to 3, we have a lab rotation where the children get introduced to a concept in the classroom. They then leave the classroom and they go into a learning lab where they're interacting with adaptive software to allow for extension, review, and reinforcement of what was introduced in the classroom, and then they feedback. And I'm giving it a very high level. And then as our kids get older, they move through different modalities on their own schedule, and it becomes more and more sophisticated. But for us, we don't see tech as just being like, a nice to have, or it's a babysitting device. For us, it's huge around what data are we getting? How do we truly understand where kids are? What do we need to do to intervene more? What does it mean to inform, various groupings based on competency level? What engagement is it driving? So we we don't look at it just as like, oh, that's a nice, cool thing to do or to have, but we will not use any online or any tech offerings that don't give us great data in the background for us to then look at a child more holistically and supporting their development.
And the tech in and of itself is only a tool. It's all about the culture you create around it and what you do.
Yeah, I mean,
data.
tech for us is an enabler. And in fact, for us, it's data. So we won't really talk about a tech strategy. We say, what's our data strategy? How do we better understand our kids? How do we build stronger profiles on our scholars? How can we, in some level, predict over what period of time we can close those gaps? Which we're doing for matric, trying to predict where they're going to land in terms of their matric results and our overall results. But we actually predicted what we thought we were going to land on. And so that is more important for us to truly personalize learning and truly understand the needs of all the kids as opposed to just having a computer for the sake of using a computer.
That's excellent. And maybe just to click again on that, let's take the example of the lab rotation model. So you've got different models depending on the phase in their child's schooling and how old they are. But let's take that example you gave, the lab rotation model. So maybe just give me an example of how you come in, learn a topic, and what you do afterwards, and how that differs to, let's say, the conventional schools that all of us attended 30 years ago. 20.
Or even 10. In fact, it's 10 for me.
I'm thinking primary school because you started with...
it's 10 years high school. I'll go for... No jokes. So the question is in terms of the way the tech is used. So when we were brought up, we'd have your textbook and you'd have your exercise pieces of paper, and then hopefully your teacher got to you to provide some level of marking and feedback, but then you moved on. So you got... 5 out of 10, and we move on. So it was just very much focused on covering the curriculum. Where for us, online and the programs that we use, we don't develop any of them. We source, we find globally who are the ed tech offerings that we believe can best suit the needs or serve the needs of our scholars. And that's all mastery based. So that you cannot go from one level to another until you've mastered that. If you are unable to master certain concepts, we then take you out of that lab environment, well, it's still in the learning lab, but put you in very small group instruction because there's obviously a concept or something that you're not grasping. And so we then intervene in that space. And then so we call them blended learning facilitators in the learning lab, and the teachers collaborate to understand the various data points and why is Stacey doing really well in the classroom and then just doing exceptionally bad online or vice versa. And so it's just a way of really like consolidating the information and what additional support would children need. And, there's also kids that do exceptionally well. So you don't want them to be held back in some ways. So you could get kids that are grade 2 reading or grade 2 grade, and then they're reading or could be learning certain subjects at a grade 3, grade 4 level. And that's having that flexibility. Tech is one way of doing it, but also understanding the data of the kids and what support or additional support they need allows us to actually move through multiple grade level mastery, but they're still in their age group.
Got it. Okay, that's very rich in the ability to focus on an individual student and intervene where required. So we focus there on how it impacts the students, which is clearly really important. That's what results in the good outcomes in the end. How does this affect the teachers?
So for us, teachers are absolutely mission critical. I know everyone says tech's going to replace teachers. Absolutely, we are not robots. The role of the teacher is going to change. And in fact, I think they're going to become even more important in the education space, which I know a lot of people don't necessarily think so, but I can come back to that. But for the teachers...
My mom was a teacher, for what it's worth. So I'm very glad to hear
that. For the role of for a teacher... they feel way more empowered in terms of that data and understanding your kids. So we are able to work with them to have then specific tasks or exercises that can support the needs of that group of kids. They don't have to be experts at tech at all. So none of them do. Exactly like when you're at home and your computer's frozen, whatever, reboot. And we've got a centralized team that is able to control and see what's going on in terms of, the internet's going down or we've got certain issues, but all of that's held centrally. So for our teachers, it's not a thing like people think it is. They just see it as a great tool. And then we spend about over 200 hours a year training and developing our staff. So just them understanding the value of what's the information that you're getting, how does it make you become a better teacher. We also recruit people straight out of university, so maybe it's just a different age group or era. So they're all tech savvy already. So it's not as if you're trying to, change anything or trying to convince anybody that this is going to be a valuable tool or not. So for us, it isn't a thing at all. It's just a way of operating, and people love it, and they see, what else could we be doing better? We have a centralized office team which does a lot of the reporting and the feedback, through Power BI, all the business intelligence, to just give them the information that they then need to take action. So I would say the teachers they've embraced it fully. It's not an issue. We don't even think about it. It's just a way of operating at Spark.
It sounds also like they would spend a lot less time marking.
So you still have assessments, because you still write national assessments written. But there's still admin for them in terms of then capturing that data. But again, for us, it's bringing in the various resources from a head office perspective to then just support them with regards how do they look at that data, what does it mean in terms of interpreting the data, and what does it mean for lesson plans going forward. And that's also heavily supported by our school leaders. So our school leaders are instructional leaders. They focus on student achievement, professional development, and parent engagement. So all the other admin side of things, we've tried to centralize and systematize that they don't have to worry about that. The reality is that teachers are always there's going to be some level of admin. But it's often people say teachers are resistant to the use of tech, where we don't see it or have experienced it at all.
That's wonderful. And just to be clear, when you say school leaders, is that what would typically be called a principal?
Yes, So
headmaster in a different context?
Yes, so they school principal. So we have a principal, and then we have, depending on the size of the school, 2 or 3 assistant principals. Yeah, and that's what we call as our school leadership team.
Okay.
And they just focus on running excellent schools.
Understood. So you've clearly thought very deeply about all of these. We're just scratching the surface. So you've spoken about, in the context of what you do differently to enable lower fees while delivering excellent academic outcomes. We've spoken quite in depth now about the technology and the data. You discussed the staffing and different ways of timetabling, etc. The third one that you mentioned was the infrastructure. So maybe tell us a little bit about what you do differently on the infrastructure side.
Yeah, good point. So we currently, as a business, we are asset light. So we only rent our properties. And so just to be clear, what is very different about Spark is we can turn around buildings and we can go greenfield. So we only need, say, 10,000 square meters for a primary school and approximately that for a high school, and it can accommodate up to 1,000 children because of the way the schedule works. But the way we use, as I say, space allows us also to be quite adaptable in terms of where we're going to go. So we've turned around wedding venues, nightclubs, shopping centers into schools.
That is a turnaround indeed.
Yeah, into schools, and we can go into areas where other big school groups can't because they need a massive property size. But then we can also build our own schools, and that's which is also great. And as we've, become more and more established and probably less risky for landlords, then a lot more people are willing to build schools for us. And again, we can go into areas that the bigger private schools can't because they need bigger pieces of land. So we need a much smaller piece of land compared to what they would want.
Okay, that's interesting. So just to be clear there, you said the 2 biggest areas of cost generally or investment is the infrastructure and the staff. On the infrastructure side, you are using smaller property, which helps lower the cost, and using that space a whole lot more efficiently.
But sorry, we have to. Why we only need a smaller space is because of the schedule. So if we didn't have that schedule, you can't isolate them.
100%. So there's one element of it which is just by having a smaller space, you will have a lower cost. There's another element though that you're touching on where you said you operate in an asset light way, so you lease the property where your schools are rather than owning that.
Yes.
Why has that been preferable to you rather than just owning the school yourself?
Yeah, so I think it's also, this is a big shareholder discussion. So there are pros and cons. When I speak to some of the big education players globally, they'd rather have PropCo completely separate to an OpCo. So from a capital allocation, they'd rather buy new schools and let someone else own and run the property, obviously. So it's strategically, for us, it was a strategic decision, prove a product, then you can go from there. And then our shareholders today just are asset light. They would rather spend money on opening new schools or buying schools, but not necessarily spending the money on the property.
Okay, got it. And you mentioned, so the two on an operating company, so running the school versus a property company owning the property, the returns tend to be quite different and therefore attract different investor bases.
Yeah.
Maybe just tell me a little bit more about that. Is it?
So, I mean, an OpCo, so your returns in an OpCo is also way more attractive than necessarily in a PropCo, but it's high risk, of course. I mean, it doesn't mean that you're going to, and for a lot of the, say, shareholders in an OpCo, they'd probably look at a turnaround, luckily not ours, but like within 10 years, where the property guys could play a really, really long-term game. It's not necessary. Are you a property player or are you an education provider? Or can you do both? But generally, we have not seen that you can have the expertise of both. And if I look at the capacity internally of Spark, and yes, you can always hire great property people, we would rather spend money on building a great learning model than on becoming the property experts. And let's rather partner with people that this is their field. So like any tech player, if you want a system to be developed, we cannot build that. We are not a purely tech software company. We would rather partner with the right people to help develop that platform, and the same for property. We'd rather have property partners that we can work with and grow, and really, we get to know each other far stronger and have the ability to scale together.
Okay, that's excellent. And I 100% get that distinction between, on the property side, that is a long-term asset with a lower expected return, but also lower risk. Maybe that appeals more to pension funds, let's say. And on the operating company side, that is a higher return expectation, but also does come with higher risk as well.
Yeah.
So that maybe appeals more to private equity,
exactly.
or could be certain family offices or the like. That's a helpful distinction. One of the topics that's come through strongly here is partnerships, as we've spoken through various areas. The technology that you use in the classroom, you don't go and build all of it yourselves. You take the best that's out there in the world and you deploy it. On the infrastructure side, you mentioned you're not going out and buying all your own schools. You're leasing and working in partnership. So what's different or what would you be looking for in an ideal partner on the infrastructure side? Purely
from a Spark, currently where we are perspective, for me, I'd want to make sure that we've got the right property partners that can help us scale, not just in South Africa, but across the continent. And that we're very aligned from a commercial perspective as well. So it's not like you as a landlord win everything, and as a school,
it's got to be win-win, not win-lose.
And it's got to be completely aligned in terms of where we want to go, what we want to do. Because for us, Spark, affordability, serving a certain demographic, providing choice to families is essential and core to who we are. So we need to make sure that the mission and vision and values are completely aligned, but also have the ability to scale. And if anything, how do we become more cost effective or better at what we do in terms of our property development or opportunities to go into completely new countries, new cities where if we wanted to go in alone, we couldn't have. And so having that, strengthening that core overall would be great value add for the business. That's great. Thanks, Stacey. On the final question on this topic is just, if I'm a parent, I've got two daughters, what I would want from their school is to know that they're here for the long term. Yeah. So how does that translate into how you would then think about the leases? So leases you do 10 plus. Yeah. At least 10 years. Yeah. I mean, and that's what we've done pretty much for all of our schools. And we'd do the same. I mean, generally, a school's not going to move. And if it's purpose-built, it's going to be a nightmare to change. I mean, we would only consider, say, a relocation of a school as if the area completely deteriorated, So, and that, I mean, that's not very common at all. And often a school actually brings a value of the area up because more and more people want to move to be closer, either for their work or for their home. So it's just an easy drop-off, and they know the kids are in a safe environment. Yes, a good school in the area, 100%. The lengths I've seen is generally 15 to 30 years, but even seen longer in some countries. I enjoyed that discussion. I think it was very rich about what you do differently to offer, lower fees and still deliver high quality academic outcomes. Let's move on a bit then. Many people don't think of schools as an investment sector. I think that's still fair to say in 2025 as we speak here today. And yet, I look at your journey. You've gone from around several rounds of angel investment through to family offices, and you've attracted what would classify as institutional capital. So from your perspective, what is appealing to investors about schools? I think it feels like it's some level of predictability and guarantee. So generally, once you've got a customer in grade R, you should have them for 12 years. So it's a safer bet, I would say, than, just a subscription model or whatever. This is like, generally, it's a safer bet for investors. If you figure out the right commercials, it's
on
really
your subscription
attractive.
model point, I do care about my daughter's school more than my Netflix subscription. So yes.
Okay, good. There we go.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. But for the shareholders, it's also, they are great returns. They are easily comparable to any industry in terms of some of the returns that these players are seeing. I would say South Africa is conservative as a market, but when you start speaking to some of the biggest education players, again, globally, there's a lot of money that's been attracted into this industry, and more is coming because they see it's actually, commercially, it's highly attractive, and this is a way more stable, predictable market that generally can also go through up and down times. You shouldn't see a massive difference, and especially if you're serving more of the mass market, whether the economy is growing or not, you can generally be able to weather some of those tough storms.
Okay, so greater stability through market cycles, as long as you're providing a good quality service, good quality academics to all your stakeholders. In this case, it's the students, the parents, and the teachers. I think which are all very, very important parts of the mix. Okay, so stability, attractive returns, and I'm interested in that return point because when I think of this sector, I think you have to earn a fair return on capital. If it's too high, it can be egregious, which is a problem again. But equivalently, if it's too low, then it's hard to have a sustainable business model. So a fair return on capital has been achieved by education groups around the world.
People are making 20 to 25%.
Return on capital, which
it is, it's a mixture of, and we're talking various markets. We're speaking about operators in South America. You're speaking about operators in the US, Europe, Middle East, Asia. So generally, especially if they're running multiple schools, multiple countries, they are looking at a 20 to 25%, and in some cases they're hitting or reaching a 30% return. So it's very consistent in what you're seeing across, different price points, different brands, it's showing that there's some level of consistency, again, across the various geographies in terms of what is possible and is absolutely feasible in the delivery.
Okay. And when you've looked at the investor base in this sector, do you think this is a sector that's applicable to all investors, or are there some traits that lend well to investing in education? So
you need a bit more of a longer term game because education is a longer term game. And it depends on where you are in your growth cycle, right? So if, you want to double a school network within 5 years type of thing, you'll need at least another 10-year horizon because to, really build up the schools and the capacity, because you're not always opening full schools immediately. Generally, it could be a phased approach. So for me, it would be, you can expect the same returns, but just it would be over maybe a 7 to 10 year time horizon versus a 5 to 7.
Got it. So it sounds like you've got a longer ramp-up period, so you've got to have a longer-term mentality as an investor.
Yeah.
But what you get in exchange for that is a steady return and a stable return across economic cycles and over a very long period of time. But if you're looking for short wins, it's probably not the sector
and
for
it's
you.
an education. You like impacting generations, right? Exactly. So you also have to have that in mind. There's got to be. I'm not saying, don't just focus purely on the commercial side, but it's also important to what are you actually offering? Yeah, what are you offering? And you will be changing generations, you will be changing society. So it's a commercial plus. There's huge impact that you could be and will be having anyway in this space.
Absolutely. You started Spark from scratch.
Yes.
So I'm keen to hear some of these war stories. Any journey starting a business will have ups and downs. It'll have its challenges. And yet here you are 11 years later and you're still growing and on the front foot. So I'd just love to hear, maybe pick one or two of some of the challenges that you've come across in your journey. And let's talk about this.
Yeah, so probably early days, this is more just humor, early days. So when I told people, I want to start Spark, this is what I'm very interested. A lot of the people I'd interact with locally would say, shame, can you not get a real job? So I was like, or they will say to me when I'm running it, they're like, a real school, like with chairs and desks. I was like, yes, what school have you gone to that doesn't have chairs and desks? Is this part-time? This is such a cute project. I was like, this is nothing cute and part-time about it. So there was just that weird, perception on what you want to do, or people don't think it's as serious.
Which, if I may interrupt you there, is absolutely bizarre when you think of I won't talk Spark specifically, but let's just take a generic private school in South Africa. Will cost 100 million rand to establish, 100, 110, 120, again, depending on the size, the location, a whole lot of varying factors. So if someone has built a school group of 10 schools, 20 schools, that's well into the billions of rands. And yet cute. It's a cute passion project, it sounds like. So yeah, it is quite bizarre. I don't know how that's happening.
I don't know. It's weird, the perception. So it was also early days when we recruited our first parent. I'll never, ever forget about it. We were sitting at a coffee shop up the road in Randburg, and the parent said to me, so where is the school? We didn't know where the school was. So we were like, we sort of knew, but Lisa's weren't science. Yeah. We were like, it's in Randburg, which is a massive suburb. And she was like, okay, great, but where? So he's like, no, we'll keep you posted. And a lot of it at the beginning was building relationships with the parents, with the staff, because we had no track record. So we had to make sure that they bought into terms of who we were and are, and where they felt like they were in a safe environment. I mean, the challenges it completely shifts over time, from running one school to running 4 schools, 8, 20, you require so many different skills and different changes. So as leaders, you constantly actually ideally need to be ahead of the game and constantly trying to hire smarter people. There would be challenges. I mean, for us, my worst experience was COVID. That for me was, I still have PTSD about it. It's just schools were closed. Families don't necessarily have the support at home. And I'm not talking about a computer and internet, but actual child mining. We had to, families were in different positions. So we were trying to just give them whatever resources they could. Collections went down significantly. So you worried about salaries. You got to pay. I mean, it was just, when our school's going to go back, then they go back, then they close. And it was hugely stressful for everybody. But I'm glad we've weathered that storm, and I think come out stronger in many ways. Maybe we were just we thought life would be easy and we'd carry on and just become bigger and bigger. And in fact, I think we've become smarter coming out of COVID. Other challenges have been, are you recruiting? For me, it's always around the people. Like, are you recruiting the right people, the right mindset? How does it look like at scale? We employ 1,500 people. You can't interview all of them like you did back in the day. There would be also challenges, parents would see all of us at the schools all the time and, have personal relationships in terms of the interaction, and now you don't. So how do you get people to see that there's something bigger that we want to do and build? So a lot of that's the changes. Also, recruiting from a teacher perspective, and it's actually got better over time, because Spark is a hard place to work. This isn't like a nice finish at 12, hang out with your mates for the rest of the day. Like, we expect really strong delivery and performance, and you will be held accountable for it. But we also expect a certain mindset. So if people are coming in and saying, oh, Shane, this family comes from this background, impossible for them to achieve, or they start making excuses, unacceptable at Spark. We're not interested. It is your responsibility. It's all our responsibility that when the scholars are at school, we will do everything that we can to support them. And so those are some of the challenges that you see. We had lots of naysayers at the beginning, which is all part of why you do it, because you want to prove them wrong as well. And so it's just evolved over time. We've been able also to build great networks and support, both locally and internationally, that's been able to get us through the bumps in the road. And we've had the right, apart from maybe one or two, but we've really had strong supportive shareholders that have also been willing to, go through the challenging, tough situations, willing to provide support in other areas. What does a great recruitment process look like? How do you do with procurement, negotiation, suppliers, dealing with landlords? So there's always those various challenges, but now we're hiring better. And so that's been a big shift that we've moved to now, hiring an MD, a CFO that understands what it means to run and manage a large-scale business, potentially multi-country and definitely multi-site.
Okay, and that sets you up then for the next phase
Yes.
of growth, which is lovely. Look, one thing I loved in what you said there were the high expectations. If I think of my own life, all the times that I've developed, if it was educationally, there was either a teacher or a lecturer or an educator of some sort who had high expectations of me and held me to a very high standard. And it's been similar as I've gone through my career as well. So it's lovely that that's an actively encouraged part of the culture at Spark, that you must have high expectations, hold people to high standards, and they'll live up to them.
And believe in the kids and absolutely every child and their potential. So you've got to be completely committed to making sure that we are able to serve each child.
Okay. And as I've listened to Stacey and both this conversation and other conversations that we've had, it's clear that you have a sense of mission, a sense of purpose. Where this whole thing started was your thesis, feeling that there's a crisis in education in South Africa, and therefore you've gone and done something about it. Now, through this journey and when you were starting it, you had a choice between, do you structure this as a non-profit organization, or do you structure this as a company or a social enterprise?
Yeah.
Ultimately, you've gone with structuring as a company or a social enterprise. So how does that better serve your purpose or your vision than going with a non-profit organization structure?
So this was a big debate, also at the beginning of Spark, and why I was pushing for a company, a for-profit institution, was because I wanted shareholders for the long term. And I often worry in the non-profit space, like things can change quite quickly. It's heavily reliant on the funder going out, raising funds, as opposed to really trying to build something that will last. And I wanted to create an organization that will live far beyond me. So hopefully this will go generations and generations. And if you bring on the right shareholders that are not just completely greedy and pure commercial players, you will have the right partners to take you through the tough times. And so it was just more of a decision. How do we create long-term sustainability? How do we rather bring on the right people that generally investors have to go through up and down. They can't just all of a sudden jump ship. I mean, maybe, but generally you don't see that. And I didn't want it to be reliant fully on me having the ability to raise capital, as opposed to rather focus on trying to build and run a successful organization. Because you see the nonprofit world, and I'm generalizing again, you'll just see the CEO or the founder, all they focus on is raising more capital. And then often the mission or vision can slightly adapt depending on what that fund wants to deploy and how it wants to be allocated. And for me, you don't want that mission drift. It can get very messy. You could also argue the same for profit, but again, it's bring on the right shareholders that are aligned to what you want to do, and then are willing to walk the longer term game with you.
It's excellent, and it's just come through so many times in this conversation, this theme that you want to focus on providing excellent instruction to your students and a place for your teachers as well. And so you've said you've taken out the infrastructure or the real estate side, and someone focuses on that. Some of the technology, there's an entity that focuses on that, and this is another example here. You're not spending your time all the time fundraising. You're there to be able to lead and guide an institution that delivers excellent academic outcomes. So that's, again, wonderful to hear. As I look forward then, you're now 11 years old as Spark, as an organization. What is your ambition? What is your vision looking forward?
Yeah, so actually probably the most excited I've been in years about what's next for Spark. So if we look at the South Africa play, so we will be doubling the network over the next 5 years. So by 2030, we will be educating over 30,000 children across the network, still a greenfield approach here in South Africa. And then a big focus for me now is looking at cross-border expansion across the continent, as well as product development, as well as looking at different business or revenue streams. And my number one topic at the moment is product development. I'm extremely excited on what we can do and where we want to go. And I've been meeting with a lot of global players, and there isn't enough innovation happening in education. Or if everyone speaks around AI, they look at it as an edtech offering within a system, as opposed to looking at how do you transform a system. Like if you look at the ecosystem of a school at a unit of economics, how could you have a better way of operating, whether you utilize AI to better understand the profiles of the scholars, to then give them even more specific schedules based on their needs, and how they learn best. So that's a lot of my attention, which I'm really excited about. Also, so I believe, so if Spark can prove that we can be a strong Education Africa play that is innovating, that's educating the mass market, and you're getting the returns of some of the big education players. Would be the only one globally doing that. Everyone's nervous about Africa. There's not many players or networks, and very few of them have figured out how to educate more of the mass market as opposed to more of the sort of high-income families. So this is my proof point. Maybe 5 to 10 years, let's hope I proved it. But this is what I believe we can do and put Africa on the map in terms of leading conversation as opposed to always, trying to play catch up and everyone feels sorry for us, as opposed to look what we can do in a constrained environment, both human capital and costs, and look at our outcomes. Now, all of you should take note because everyone just wants to throw more and more money at the problem, but it doesn't solve the core issue.
It's really exciting. It's a wonderful vision and a lot there. A doubling of the network to educating over 30,000 students by 2030, which in the context of schools is literally just around the corner.
Yeah,
if you start a school today, as you alluded to earlier, there's phasing. It's not full from grade 1 to 12 overnight. That's a multi-year journey. So there clearly must be a lot of work going on under the hood.
Yep. That's exactly.
Very
There's a lot of work.
Very exciting, Stacey. Now, look, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation on affordable independent schools, and I've watched your growth from a distance, and we'll be continuing to cheer you on in this next phase of growth as you go.
Great.
So, coming down then to my final question, which is back to you and away from affordable independent schools. So, I asked the same concluding question to all of our guests, which is, please tell us about your favorite teacher or lecturer or educator.
So my favorite. I did not like school. Honestly, it makes me feel, I did not like school whatsoever. I just threw myself into sport and academics, great, but I wouldn't say school was the happiest time of my life. But I would say probably, Margie Sutherland being my supervisor when I was at Gibbs was a person that was pushing me and not getting me out of my comfort zone. And I think it was one of the best things she had ever done for me because it really did open a whole new world for me and then enabled Spark to start. So Margie, and she's been a great supporter of Spark since the beginning, and you always needed that believer when no one else believed. And you'd often question your own beliefs. So she, for me, is probably the greatest role model I've had, or that had the biggest impact in my life. But at school, definitely did not like school. So it's very weird. I'm in education, and I really hope that it changes for the kids at Spark, because I want to create this love for learning, love for school, the way they can learn and, from each other. So I hope it's a very different experience for them. But I appreciate Margie at Gibbs, who just took me out of my comfort zone, and definitely probably would not be here if she hadn't pushed me in a different direction or into a different way of looking at things.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for coming into the pod today, Stacey. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation on affordable independent schools and learning some more about you. I learned some things I didn't know today. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thanks so much.